introducing the fourth and final session of the Sri Lanka Economic Summit 2023, titled Achieving Consensus to Sustain Reforms and Growth. I would like to invite Mr. Vishwas Udgerkar, Partner and South Asia Delivery Excellence Leader, Deloitte, to share a presentation.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is always a pleasure to come back to Sri Lanka from your nearest neighbor and get an opportunity this time to share some of the experiences as well as my own views regarding what is important. That's a consensus to implement the very sustainable reforms, or you call it restructuring, as the Honorable President mentioned yesterday, leading to the sustainable growth. I'm very thankful to the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce to give this opportunity. See, while there are a number of other things, but we talk about the various parts of the reforms, what is important basically to any reform program, how we basically achieve and bring in the consensus across the different stakeholders. And I have some presentation, but I thought of, I'll use this only when it's required, because as everyone says, it's very difficult to speak in the session after lunch, but it's equally difficult to speak in the last session, because there will be always the risk of repetition. Many things would have already covered, many things already you heard. So I'll use it and keep it more basically sharing my experiences back in my country, where we have gone through a very similar situation way back in 1991. And through the last 30 years, the successive governments actually adopted various measures to implement the reforms also. So without going through, of course, you achieved a lot more in the last year or so, many more things to achieve. And for that, probably you need to look at various aspects, whether it's a transparency, whether it's accountability, but most important is how you basically ensure there is inclusiveness and the participatory approach. I'm not talking about the benefits of reform, but even to implement the reforms, you need to basically take every stakeholder together. And for that, I think that's the most important aspect of any reforms you achieve. There are various ways you can, of course, approach. Important is to have a very transparent way you share with the stakeholders. You have the great communication strategy. You also ensure it is not only the intent, but also the perceptions among the stakeholders. But most importantly, it is also important to see what is required at that point of time. Not, you cannot have the one solution for everything. Like yesterday, Mr. Montek Singh mentioned, always your approach to achieve a consensus before you implement the reform may not be always works. And sometimes the confrontation, which has a very innovative way to basically finally achieve the consensus. Or the Honorable President mentioned yesterday, see, there is a situation where we have no alternative but to accept the situation, and there is no way we can go back. So in a way, that is also, taking everyone together. And again, through my examples, I will try to see that whether some of the different approaches we use basically to able to move forward on the reform path and reform agenda. See, this is the, relatively the recent, one of the major indirect tax reforms in the country, probably. And the country like India, which is very diverse views, politically very, while we have the reasonably strong government at the national level, the 29 states practically divided among the various political parties, some of the national parties, some of the very regional focused parties. And while principally everyone accepted, this is one way to bring in the indirect tax reform, to remove the multiple ways that every state used to charge the, indirect taxes. There are central taxes, there are state taxes, there are entry taxes in moving the goods from one state to other. And this was one of the major hindrance when you are creating the manufacturing hubs beyond certain, the popular states to so. So when chambers accepted that, when the different political parties accepted that, it took almost many years basically to move towards actually implementation. The reason being, the government led by the great economists like Manmohan Singh, when he implemented or rather introduced this reform, there was a significant opposition to this, particularly for those states. There are states which likely to lose some of their revenues. Some states used to gain, and probably they could not achieve or bring them together, despite there is a method to bring in all states. It was the committee led by the finance minister of one of the opposition-led state, but they could not achieve. So why it has happened probably? Probably maybe everyone tried to protect their self-interest over the well-accepted common goal. But when the new government came, and very interestingly, and I can talk here, probably not, I can speak that way back in India, is the strongest opponent was none other than the states then led by the current Prime Minister. Because that was the manufacturing state, they would have lost a lot of revenue when this reform is, had we introduced the reform. But when he came to the power, he realized and he knew that actually what are the issues, and probably earlier government failed to, reach on a consensus on that. So he adopted the different approach. And then some of those issues were addressed, and he took what Montek said yesterday is a kind of a approach where he said, let's go and first implement. Whether we are ready entirely on that, there are no, kind of a clarity on how we are to roll out, because we are not fully ready with the required back-end technology for that. But he said, let's go with that. And same time, he actually ensured that some of the concerns were addressed. For example, there is the approach they set up the council. And this is the only tax proposal where subsequent rates, subsequent changes, they need not have to go back to any of the elected government. It is a council led by the finance minister and the representative of the 29 states and 2 union territories. They were empowered to keep refining, making the changes, and that actually was very successful, and that has a very innovative approach they adopted by bringing in the representation in terms of voting rights also. The 2/3 voting rights were given to the state, 1/3 to the government, and any major change in the structure require 3/4 of the member to agree that. So unless they reach to an agreement, they will not able to move forward on any changes in the, whether it is a group of commodities with different tax rates. And actually that over the years, like 6 years or so we adopted, we have significant, you have seen that there is a significant increase in the tax collections despite the COVID coming in. We are currently, close to $200 billion we collect through the GST. Lot of ease in doing business. People have then flexibility where to set up their manufacturing plants, where to sell it. It's not necessarily where exactly the consumption centers are. And logistic cost, which used to be significantly high in India, was significantly reduced, attracting many more international manufacturers coming to India. So it's a different approach was adopted. And, though initially, typically the different political parties addressing their own, the vote base may sometimes take the publicly different stand. But, one political party who introduced, one political party which are opposing has implemented. There is no way other than basically they have to come together and take it forward. So it was a very, very successful one. And I think day by day we are improving, except petroleum products. Most of the commodities are already covered up under it, and actually industry is very well appreciated. They also bring in the chambers representation to that by creating 18 sectoral group led by the different chambers to basically give their inputs to the council from time to time, and it has moved very, very progressively. The second example, and I'll just come back to this if time permits. But you know, when 1991 we almost had a similar situation, maybe the reasons could be different, and when we had to reach out to IMF again by even hypothetically the gold what we had, we then had a series of reforms. But one of the important point was that we can bring in the reforms, we can cut the expenditure, we can have the banking reform, but most important is how to attract the investment. And only way to attract the investment is pick up some of the important sectors and create the framework to get both the domestic investors, rather domestic players cutting across contractors to developer to invest, but more importantly bringing in the international investors to the country. And while I'll talk about the highway sector, which is more successful, initially we opened up the energy sector, the power sector, and we adopted the MOU route to attract and all the biggies were actually lined up. We given very attractive policies to them, very, lucrative returns, kind of a 16% post-tax return when your, inflation was in like about 10% or so. But we failed actually, we failed there. Reason being, while government was clear, what they actually failed to see, understanding what is actually ability of the consumers to pay, because you are attracting the investor, agreeing to pay them a good return, but whether you are sustainable to pay that kind of prices or whether consumers will pay that kind of prices. So that's one issue. Second is, that when you don't have the very transparent way of signing the bilateral MOUs, whether government to government or directly through the investors, you always lead to a bit of a risk of perception, if not even your intent, about the corruption. Why the particular, the international player is favored over the others. And this has led to, within 2 or 3 years, it's a kind of a first plant which came up, which is, and many of you maybe heard about the Enron Corporation of US. It was failed because both politically it was not accepted. By the time we have the regulator in place, regulator also refused to even honor the government agreements, and it is miserably failed. Same time when we started looking at the other important sector, which is transport sector and the highways, I think we learned the lesson from there. And there basically we looked at all the stakeholders were taken on board, and really the level playing field was created both for domestic construction companies, international investors, and more importantly, we also looked at how we ultimately give the cost benefit and the facilities to the users of the facility. And we totally moved away from the typical MOU routes to move into the very transparent public procurement through bidding or so. And this is basically started and then moved over the last 20 years. Successive governments, different political parties led that, including in between there is a party which is supported, the government which is supported by the communist parties. Still, I think this is never actually, the reform was always progress and only we refined from time to time. And today we have a situation that all the different types of the public-private partnership, different types of procurement are very well implemented. I think it's another classic example when one government started way back by the government led by the then BJP, then taken forward by Mr. Singh's government, and then it is continuously now in the present government. Now they are getting the right, even the benefits of where government invested in the projects which are not initially viable, they are also getting into the divestment and their equity or their investment is being divested and bringing in another set of international investors out there. So again, how you approach, how you take everyone together, there is a, the win-win for everyone. It actually is successful. And I remember when 20 years back, first time the first road sector was approached, again through the MU road, there were the toll riots actually. People were absolutely not ready to pay the toll. Now everyone pays the toll because they get the benefits. Same time we have addressed all the concern. For example, we have the concept like the local users need not have to pay the toll. If you look at all these reforms, and there are many more actually, I picked up only 2, and there is also the digital ID is another important thing, which we used to basically see that how transparently the social security or the social benefits are directly transferred actually. That is a massive, I think again the largest, worldwide the largest digital citizen ID program or so. What is interesting to see, but if you look at all these three major things I picked up, this is all implemented when there was a era of coalition government. None of these governments who implemented this has a majority, clear majority at the national level, and there is also the very fractionalized the state governments. But only way they did that because they were able to communicate with the beneficiary, take the industries, associations on board, address the concern from time to time, and they were able to do. Like for example, if you have highways program, you have the truckers have their own issues, you have the common citizens have issues, there is a consistency of the policies throughout the concession period, even the developers have the issues. So this is all addressed very well. I will quickly talk you something, and interestingly, as I mentioned, these are all when we have the not very strong governments, but despite that achieved. But we can learn from all of these things how to move forward. But interesting part is, not always the strong governments want to take the same route. Like I mentioned that when we talk about GST, the government took the confrontation as a route to arrive at a consensus. Today we have one of the strongest government in the last 30 years. A very absolute majority, a great perception, but recent two reforms they tried to implement and miserably failed. One of them in 2020, they came out with long-awaited agricultural reforms, and they just gone ahead and passed the act in the parliament without realizing probably they never created that consultation, they never created kind of a level playing field. And also the perception was this was not necessarily passed when the corporate sector wanted to have that reform or the farmers wanted to have the reform, but maybe targeted at some corporates which will be more benefited because of this. And there was a huge protest from the farmers. First, the Supreme Court of India, because of the agitation of the farmers, stayed this. And then subsequently, government had to go, and this is a very strong government. Yeah, all of you know the Prime Minister is a very strong personality. Generally, they refuse to go back whatever once they move forward, but they have to repeal and cancel these acts. Now, hopefully, it will come in the revised format after reaching into the proper, kind of a consensus. Second one is again the land reform. Again, they wanted to create a land reform. Here, actually, slightly different thing. In fact, they wanted to pay little higher compensation to the landowners also. But again, it's a very ill-designed reform. Again, not consulted the financiers, ability of the people to pay the compensation which they wanted to come out as a part of reforms. And so this was also another one is absolutely never moved forward. And these two, so by understanding and experience from this is whether consensus is important, you have to adopt the very different approach every time. Most important is taking all of them together and need to convince and communicate them. Some of them will happen in a short term, some of them will happen in the little long term, but there is no one fix for all these approaches. It has to be approached case to case basis differently. And again I said it's not the strong government or the kind of a weak government, different political views. I think it can be possible when there is a realization among all the stakeholders, this is an important, this benefited to them. And sometimes the situation, like a situation demands that everyone has to come together also. I think I'm on the top of my hour. I had a couple of more examples, but I'll stay away from that. Again, thankful to the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, and it was, of course, my pleasure to basically get an opportunity to speak with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Udgirkar. Introducing our panelists for this session, we have, of course, Mr. Udgirkar, who we have just heard from, and joining him will be Honorable Shahan Semasinghe, State Minister of Finance, Professor Anil Jayantha Fernando, Member of the Economic Council of the NPP, Dr. Harsha De Silva, Member of Parliament and Chair of the Committee on Public Finance, and Ms. Nadishani Pereira, Executive Director, Transparency International Sri Lanka. The session will be moderated by Dr. Nishan Dimel, Executive Director of Verite Research. I invite our panelists to take their places on the stage.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, and I think we've come to our final panel and a most exciting one at that. We are going to be on a first name basis on the panel, so we're going to do away with the honorifics, I think. And thank you to Vishwas for giving us such a great introduction. I just want to tell you there's going to be a QR code that you can scan on your phone to submit your questions. So right away, it'll stay up there for quite some time, and we want you all to scan it. I'm going to give you a structure for the panel. We're going to go at high speed. The first part of the panel discussion is so we are going to be in 4 parts. The first about the current debt restructuring, the IMF program, its progress. The second part is going to be on governance and the question of governance and how governance is important in this process. Third part is going to focus on the private sector, and the fourth part on consensus and building consensus. And there are people here from different political persuasions, and that's going to be very interesting. We're going to try and do each part in 15-20 minutes, and we want you to send your questions according to the path that we are in. It'll make it easier for those who are sending questions to me. So right at the beginning, you can start by talking about or sending questions on the IMF program and debt restructuring. And then when we come to the second part, I'll tell you that we are there, and we can continue that way. So I want to tell the panelists, you are free to jump in while somebody is speaking, okay? So this is not wait for Nishan to ask me to speak. That's not how it works. You disagree, you have an opinion, please come in. I will jump in too sometimes while you're speaking, but please keep your answers succinct and short. And let's jump right in by talking to Shehan. Shehan, we are talking about the IMF plan, the progress on debt restructuring. I know you have some big news to announce, but here's my double-barrel question to you. Do you think this recovery plan is good enough? Is it adequate? What would you identify as key elements that are not yet in the plan that we need to add in going forward? Can you explain? And do you feel that the progress has been adequate? Is the government doing a good enough job in implementing the current plan we have? So a lot of, I'm combining quite a few questions, and you can speak quickly. Is it adequate? Are we doing a good job on progress? What else would you do? And what's the latest on debt restructuring right now?
Thank you, Nishan. You're talking about the big news. I think it's the debt restructuring resolution, what the OCC and the Paris Club has just announced about maybe about an hour ago. So basically, this was something which the country was looking forward to. And I know with the staff level agreement getting delayed, and also negative perceptions were getting built on the debt restructuring process and the second tranche. So I think we are now set to go for the second tranche. I'm confident that the IMF will take it up at the board, and the most complex process have been concluded right now. And that includes the Paris Club creditors. Then we had the OCC with co-chaired by India, Japan, and France. We had China sitting outside the OCC, but joined all meetings as an observer. So I think it's a big achievement for Sri Lanka, and that was as a result of the leadership by His Excellency the President, And we appreciate the support and the commitment of the Secretary of the Ministry of Finance and the staff, Central Bank Governor and the staff of the Central Bank. So altogether, we are very confident that we can march forward. Then coming back to your second question, whether it's adequate.
We're talking about the IMF program itself, the plan.
The IMF program is designed to stabilize the economy. We have achieved stabilization to a great extent, but we think we have more to go. And the process itself is very complex. It is not as easy as we hear from different parties, but it's a very complex situation. IMF program itself will not be adequate, but it has to be supplemented by all the other reform agenda what we are taking forward. So I think the government is in the correct track. We do understand that people had to go through pain with the introduction of the new reform agenda of the government, but now it's facing off. So the program plus the other disciplines will be brought in, and that will ensure we go into a sustainable economy.
Thank you, Shan. I'm going to ask you to think about any suggestions you want to make to add to the program, but I'm going to come to Harsha based on what Vishwas spoke to us. Now, he said, look, we sustain reforms through changes in government with minority governments. We managed to maintain consistency of policy. Harsha, do you think that we are not talking about consensus here, but do you think that Parliament is adequately involved in the process of what's being implemented? Does it have enough oversight? I know you sit on the oversight committee as well. And what improvements do you want to suggest to parliamentary oversight going forward in building this kind of common, consistent consensus for the country?
Well, thanks, Nishan. I chair the Committee on Public Finance. And as a member of the opposition, to deal with the issues that I have to in a very sort of, I don't want to use the word disruptive, but confrontational manner at times, because, we need consensus. The Committee on Public Finance has to approve legislation, regulations before it goes to the House for a vote. If it doesn't come through, the government can suspend standing orders and yet go ahead and approve those amendments to legislation. But this is where we build consensus, because there is no other committee in Parliament that has, got to look at these changes
Harsha,
before it's voted on.
I'm going to come in and say, but I've heard you say publicly that your committee is majority government, that even if you disagree, the majority vote carries it. How do you view the power of the committee if that's a concern you have?
At the end of the day, this is a democracy, right? There is a weird sort of a coming together of Shahan's group, essentially the Pohotua MPs, and the president, and but that is the reality, right? So what happens in parliamentary committees, usually it has to be the government gets one more than the opposition, but unfortunately we haven't been able to do that. The speaker has ruled that it will be based on the representation in the House, so we have a lot more government members than opposition. Right? So while I try to bring issues, to be analytical, ask questions, sometimes, there was a time that I was removed. And, the reappointment took a long time, and due to pressure brought from various people on governance.
Yeah. Harsha, I understand. So I want you to make a recommendation for us, about how we can improve the oversight of Parliament going forward.
Yeah, so we are setting up something called the Parliamentary Budget Office. And that is an independent body. I'm happy to announce that this end of the week, will carry advertisements for the budget officer and the deputy budget officer, who we are trying to recruit at an attractive market remuneration. And that will create like a 20-25% analytical unit that will be able to sort of analyze what the government is bringing to the legislation on a non-partisan basis. So if that is possible, then we can clearly look at the pros and cons of legislative amendments and then hopefully be able to arrive to some sort of consensus, converge on some sort of commonality. And I think that's probably going to be the major change in going forward in bringing that type of consensus through the parliamentary mechanism.
Thank you, Harsha. I'm going to ask Anil about whether there are things he disagrees with the current IMF plan. What do you, are there things that you don't agree with that you'd like to see changed, and what are those? But giving you a moment to think about it, I'm going to go to Nadishani. So after her, you're going to come and tell us what your disagreements are with the current plan. But I'll ask Nadishani, what are the key indicators or milestones, Nadishani, from Transparency International, representing large groups of civil society, that you're looking at to determine the effectiveness of the current economic recovery plan? So people measure economic recovery differently. How do you see society looking at it? How do you look at it? And I think you led the civil society governance diagnostic for Sri Lanka as well. So what are your thoughts on how you evaluate what recovery means?
Thank you, Nishant. So Honorable Sema Singh was saying that people were waiting for the debt restructuring. But actually, I'm not sure whether that's the case, because I'm not sure whether the majority of the people even understand or want to understand what is debt restructuring. But people were and are waiting for their lives, the quality of lives to improve, for their salary to be able to be manageable, in terms of meeting their expenses, for the young people to be able to have some hope that their very innocent, small dreams of, settling down in life or pursuing certain careers, education, for hope that that can happen, for people to be able to go to a hospital and have medicine available, for kids to go to school and have their basic needs met. I mean, people are still waiting. So the question is whether, whether what the money that's coming in through the IMF, World Bank, ADB, other bilateral donors, whether this will translate into actual outcomes for the people. And for that, there are certain essential elements, because what has prevented all these years from that happening and keeping this country in a perpetual developing state is that there is this leakage called corruption. So whatever you pour in, there are all these holes. And if you don't fix the governance corruption issue, the same is going to happen again. After all, this is our 17th IMF agreement, right? So basically, indicators would be, how much of the stakeholders are involved in the conversation, in the discourse around reform. Have you heard them? Have you got them involved? Do you even take the feedback, not just ticking a box kind of consultation?
So, Adishani, you were listening to Vishwas, right? And
yes.
He somehow said India got this right, got the feedback. Vishwas, are you seeing, what is Nadishani saying? And do you have some thoughts to add, like how did India do this consensus? Nadishani says you have to get the feedback, but India is a very, very large country. It seems impossible, yet you say it happened. Give us a little bit of the insight into, what Nadishani is asking for and how it happened in India.
Okay. See, I think when IMF came to us in 1991, and it was followed by that when we used that as an opportunity basically to initiate the reforms. And once the political community realized that it is the pride of the country actually going to the IMF, using your gold reserves to get the IMF on the board. It was very different environment then, like India was not today's India. There was not a kind of a power of at least the consumer power what we today enjoyed. We didn't have that. And we had a very, very matured prime minister, and he brought in the non-political expert in the form of Mr. Manmohan Singh as a finance minister. I think that was the intent was given. This was followed by two major internal challenges we had, nothing to do with the reform per se. One of them, of course, we had a very huge religion-oriented crisis in India. I don't want to get into that in 1992. And we have the capital market scam in 1992. See, this would have really derailed our reform agenda. But what was again done, very quickly we responded to the situation and used that also again as an opportunity to bring in the financial sector reform, abolish the office of CCI, which used to, looked at the capital market, and brought in the Securities Exchange Board of India. And that actually sent the message that the intent of the government is not to just use this to resolve the crisis, but basically look at the opportunities. And ability for them to reach out to the very best political parties. And you know that always, many respected politicians are here on the dais. But many times politicians take a particular stand publicly, but not necessarily when you reach out to them. They will able to understand the intent and able to understand and reach out to the really good solution, because they all believe in the interests of the country. And that exactly happened in India. We had a 1996, the communist-supported government, but they never derailed the reforms, actually. And issues were taken on board, taken upfront, and started resolving the issue. I give an example. There was a corruption-related aspect. It's not that, and that was again tackled by bringing in the additional measures and reforms also. And look at from 1991, I think we never had a requirement to go back to the funding. We've gone through many crises in between, but I think we're able to resolve those. Probably, I don't know whether I answered your question.
There seems to be some kind of transparent professionalization,
of course.
In a way that built credibility, and also making sure that corruption was contained. I'm going to move to Anil, where I asked him to say what he disagrees. Anil represents the JVP here today, Shehan, the government, Harsha, the SJB. Shehan has the hardest job, I think. And Shehan, we're going to end with you by you also telling us about what your responses are to some of the things that have been said. And also there's a question from the audience asking about the update on the litigation of Hamilton Reserve Bank and its implications on the debt restructuring. So just to give you a heads up and for Anil to come back on his disagreement. Yeah.
Thank you, Nishan. In fact, looking at this IMF, the proposal, of course, so we did not have any other options, though we had other options like before unilaterally declaring that we are not in a position to service our debts. The IMF is only one stakeholder. When we take the entire economic gamut of economic players, IMF, government, private sector, general public, civil society organization likewise. So, by focusing the prevailing situation, IMF has focused only on the government fiscal consolidation, like the technical aspect, because I see disconnection of economic recovery and economic stability. Despite the fact that we have different ideologies, political ideologies and economic policies, now we are at a juncture we should not allow any humans to suffer. So, how best we could stabilize the economy and support the economic growth, rather inclusive growth, and by reducing the disparity, regional disparities, and inequality in income distribution and wealth distribution. But, so maybe IMF does not have the clear indication or idea how best government would back its plan of economic or the economic development plan, how best the production would be increased, how big the resources are utilized for the production purposes. That could be one of the reasons for IMF to focus highly, mainly on the fiscal consolidation. That is one of the weaknesses I see. Then eventually, government also had no option, having a very little economy, poor economic growth, and they have to manage the primary and the public expenses with the revenue. So how big the revenue could be increased? No way, without improving your production. The only option is to increase taxes. So that is how, so more and more taxes on the ordinary people. So from the IMF side, they come out with more and more austerity measures. The pain taken by the general public. So we have to ask the question, is it fair? The pain taken by the general public, where are so many other players, maybe very few, so they are not contributing out of their wealth, income, to recoup this situation, but at the same time, general public is paying the price.
Anil, I'm going to put you in a tough spot here. Yes. So tell us a specific thing you disagree with, or you'd want to do differently on this recovery path.
Yeah.
You would change A. You would do X.
Yeah.
That is not done today. So if you can, and maybe we'll come back to that later, but is there something you disagree with specifically? The IMF says this, we mustn't do it.
Yeah.
Or here's something the IMF doesn't say, we must do it.
Yeah. Of course, there are several things. So I'll just point out that number one, so what I disagree with this IMF proposal is,
and maybe we'll just do one for now and come back to
okay, then I'll explain this one. So this is more critical.
Yeah.
That is just restricting like us to have a primary, the balance of 2.3 by 2025. On the one hand, IMF wants us to stabilize the economy and unlock the growth potential, but in the meantime, you have to have 2.3% the primary balance. So that is a rather unrealistic target and impossible, because if you take the world average, regional averages and all those things, and it is not possible. But having such a constrained situation here, low revenue situation, it is not that possible. Then what happens is, you have to curtail your primary and essential expenses. But on the other hand, you do not worry about your borrowings and interest payment. That is indicative in the recent budget as well. Compared to the last year, your debt servicing, that component of the interest part was 1 trillion something, but this time it is 2,651 billion. So you keep your interest component. That means interest component does not increase eventually without borrowing. So you borrow more and more without having a clear long-term development plan, but to manage these things. So rather repay your debt. So therefore there is a paradox. On the one hand, you want to recover the economy, but on the other hand, you lock your growth potential.
You're saying it's too optimistic and too short-term.
Yeah. Short-term based on technical aspects. But it is the responsibility of the government to come out with this long-term economic plan, how best. They're not only the local economic dimension, but also the external sector as well, even when it comes to reserves. So the reserves could be built simply ignoring other aspects. But in a vibrant economy, you need to let other variables, maybe importation and other investments and all those things be active. Then only you could develop your reserves. But here
the
plans.
priority is growth.
Yeah.
And the other things must come on top of that priority, whereas now the priority is fiscal consolidation and growth has been kind of left to manage itself.
And a few more seconds, then there is another...
You'll get a chance to come back on other ideas.
All right.
Okay. I want to close this session by going back to giving Shehan a chance to respond. And Shehan, I'm going to add 2 layers to your responses. One, of course, is that somebody said, please, so the Hamilton Bank, and please elaborate on what sort of interest rates on foreign debt the government will be paying. Now, I know that's not a question we can answer now, but, and maybe I will just say that it's an in-principle agreement that has come through from Paris Club. So that does not have these details at the moment. But maybe, Shan, you can tell us this now. China also announced an in-principle agreement over a month and a half ago. Does this mean that with the China agreement in principle, Paris Club agreement in principle, we have all the bilaterals now agreed in principle? What does Hamilton Bank throw a spanner in the works? And do you want to respond to anybody? I'll give you just 2 minutes and close the session.
Nishan, I think you'll have to excuse me for not answering both the first question.
No problem.
The Hamilton Reserve Bank and the other matter.
That's fine.
But yes, as you say, China is included in this. So China, we had basically an agreement with China where the details were shared with the OCC, the Paris Club, and then we got the agreement in principle. So China is a part of it, and our advisors will continue engagements with the private creditors to come into a resolution with them. Most of the points which were discussed now on fiscal consolidation as well as the suffering people go through, I think yes, if you see the country 15 months back, were we to continue as it is 15 months back, or we had to take different decisions than what was taken before to ensure that we don't face into a crisis again. So this is the same thing what India had gone through, the same thing what Korea has gone through. They went into a crisis, but had to take bold decisions to ensure that they don't go back to a crisis and also to face all challenges for the future. So I agree with you on the point what you said, the implementation, the introduction was done by one party politically, then implementation was done by another separate party who would have opposed at that time, and then from there onwards the economy was growing. So what I see here is fiscal consolidation was the priority when it came to this program. And then moving forward, it is not only the taxation point what we are looking at. We do understand on taxation we are at the highest level. So we cannot move beyond that. Then how are we going to collect our required revenues? This budget also emphasizes more on getting the tax net broadened. So this is one of the weaknesses in Sri Lanka. So we'll ensure as a government that we'll broaden the tax net and we'll also digitize so that the required revenues will be collected to the state and that we will not burden further by adjusting our tax policies. So this is one concrete decision the government has taken. And then all the other burdens which are coming on to the treasury, like if you see the SOEs, is a severe burden on the treasury. So are we going to continue with this burden, or are we going to get the support of the private sector, get the confidence of the private sector, enhance their confidence, and ensure that the private sector supports the government and takes the leadership in taking the economy forward? So as a government, our policy is very liberal and will ensure transparency. That is a key principle of this program also. And will ensure that the difficulties that have been faced by people are faced off and we go into a stronger economy.
Thank you. Thank you.
You said we can jump in, but I seek your permission for 1 minute.
You don't need my permission. Go
Okay.
ahead.
See, I think there is a misunderstanding of what exactly the problem is. And this was the case before the government finally went to the IMF. Because a lot of people thought this was a liquidity crisis. And that if you can get a loan from China or India or somewhere, this problem can be solved. So we don't have to go to the IMF. That is not the case. We had a solvency problem. We continue to have a solvency problem. So therefore, unless we undertake deep reform in this economy, you can't just put a plaster and get a loan and fix this. So if you're going to be sort of naive about the recommendation, then of course we are going to be looking at a very, very difficult and complicated future.
Thank you, Harsha. I'm going to, and thanks so much for all the answers. I'm going to move us to our second section, but on the Hamilton Reserve Bank, maybe I should say what happened is that the United States government put forward an amicus curiae brief to the courts, and that effectively means that they said, look, we want to put in submissions that assist the court in making the decision. Technically, what that means is that the court will take much longer to decide, and if Sri Lanka has completed its debt restructuring, before the court is able to come to conclusion, then it is likely more favorable for Sri Lanka in terms of how that result turns out. Whereas if the court was if that amicus curiae brief wasn't presented and the court had to decide right now, that would be less favorable. So right now it's taken a turn. As long as Sri Lanka gets the debt restructuring done in the next couple of months, the amicus curiae brief may extend the time of court. I'm going to jump into our second part, okay? And Nadishani, I'm going to bring you in here, and in this one, the closing remarks also will be yours, okay? You'll get the last word. And I'm going to start with you as well. The focus, when we talk about governance, now Harsha, I think the two very important things. Shehan said, look, we want to do this once and for all. We don't want to restructure it again. And the whole point is that we want to get it done sustainably. Harsha said we must do deep reform to do that. But your governance diagnostic has said that deep reform is not just about economic stuff, it's about governance stuff. Now, can you explain that to us a little better? And do you also want to tell us what you think about the governance? Is there adequacy in what is being done on the governance side? Is it enough? Is it going to work? Is it going to give us sustainable deep reform of the sort you're thinking about? And why or why not?
Yes. It's not just our civil society governance diagnostic report, but the IMF governance diagnostic report very clearly says that in order to achieve economic recovery, these anti-corruption governance reforms are essential. So they've also made the connection. So I think it's an illusion to think that we can just talk on pure economics reform here without really addressing the elephant in the room. It's not even an elephant anymore. I mean, people were out in the streets last year because people made the connection between what happened to the country, the bankruptcy, and governance. And then the Supreme Court, with the recent decision, confirmed further that this was a man-made preventable disaster caused by bad decisions or not taking the right decisions by those we have entrusted this power to in the best interest of the country. So now we need to figure out how come that happened and what was the role of those in governance, what was the role of oversight agencies, what was Parliament doing, and how come we let this happen. If we don't fix the root cause, or at least a root cause, you would agree, right, to the current crisis, it's like putting plasters. Yes, we are not in a petrol queue, and that's because we've got some money, and but have we addressed the wound, the cancer inside, or we just put some plasters? And this is what has happened to our country. That's why we are going for the 17th time. We should be ashamed, and we should learn from our mistakes. So this is what very clearly, the two governance diagnostic report, the good thing is that not only identifying the problem, but it also lays down very doable, practical reforms, immediate term, medium term, long term, things that you can actually do to fix those corruption vulnerabilities. And what is needed is only one thing, and that is political will. The people have already expressed that they want a system change, right? And honestly, do we see political will? You ask whether it's adequate. My short answer is no. Like, can you tell me what are the governance reforms that have been done so far? Like, I mean, in the IMF agreement, we've even promised to create some transparency platform, like online platforms, and put some information out there on public debt expenditure. These things are still pending. Now, it's simple. It's not even doing a reform. We're talking about just giving some information to people, the people who own it, like people who deserve to know, right? How much debt, from whom, what are the tax exemptions, to whom, on what basis, and we have proposed more things. These are basic reforms on expenditure, budgetary expenditure, variation, what's the reason? I mean, that's like where you start, by creating transparency. And if we heard Honorable Minister says that government is committed to transparency, so how come we need to see it in action? And I have to say this, and I represent civil society here, right? For all these reforms, there has to be an enabling environment, right? And what we see, honestly, is a disabling environment. Now, if for real reform, and if the government is actually committed to these reforms, then the government would welcome public critique, dissent, information requests, participation. But instead, what is happening? Any sort of dissent, any sort of questioning is violently crushed, any sort of protest is suppressed, and then you go another step and you bring in laws like the Anti-Terrorism Act and the online so-called safety bill and the Broadcasting Commission bill, and upcoming is apparently an Ensure Act, all of them against international standards, very clearly trying to legally now suppress our very basic fundamental rights that are in our constitution. Freedom of expression, which includes right to ask information, right to question, right to dissent. So now, then how can you do reform and say, but no questions? You know, if you are clean, you would not have a problem. You won't be scared of being questioned. So you create this scary sort of situation, and also you keep giving the negative signaling to independent commissions, right? By the way you treat them when they dare to question a minister's decisions, you remove somebody.
I'm going to maybe take this to, thank you for that input, and I'm sure Shahan's going to give you some responses very soon. But, Vishwas, India also, has some sort of laws that may be considered, reducing freedoms in different ways. How have you seen, Nadishani's concerns played out in India? Not that we are holding India up as a role model, but, since you're with us, we'd like to understand how did civil society have an impact, and how were governance issues in a serious way that you felt were simply addressed?
So there are a number of things we have done, and it's very difficult to cover all of them, but just let me touch upon a few things. One is, when you start the reforms, and particularly which are addressed because of, we need to address the immediate requirement and all, there is always limitation how much of consensus or how much of everyone's view we can address. But as we come out of that, then there is an opportunity for us to come out with series of other initiatives. For example, we need to really strengthen our institutions, basically, how they will create or how they will play the role to bring in the governance. And there are 2 or 3 major institutions. What we have seen and what we've done in India is the central bank is fairly independent actually for many years. In fact, many times the central bank governor and the finance ministers, they have the different view than central bank, and there is a clear role differentiation between them, what both of them can do actually. That has helped us actually to not to government, for example, if RBI is sitting on the huge reserves, government cannot just draw that and actually use to address some of their immediate problem. It is RBI's prerogative. We also, from the empowering the citizens, we have the very strong officer of controller of Auditor General, CAG, and in the past, which has really taken head-on on the government, particularly prior to this government coming on board. And because of their reports, some of the ministers had to resign. In fact, 1 or 2 ministers also had to go to the prison because of the way they manipulated the policies also. It is very, very independent, constitutional appointment where it is very difficult for the government to even impeach or change that position. Supreme Court of India is again very reasonably independent, and they many times actually question the government. And then you have the many other institutions, for example, the Securities Board of Exchange of India also. We also come out with reforms like actually right to information reform, that any citizen can actually go and seek the information, and government is obliged to respond to that and provide the details. Of course, there is reluctance many times, but there is also mechanism to file the appeal and get that information. That's the way sometimes civil societies can also play their role. We have the another two institutions primarily addressing the corruption beyond, besides the CAG. We had earlier the office of what they call is Chief Vigilance Office, again a fairly independent, but particularly at sometime around 2012 or so, they have come out with a bill they call it the Lokpal bill, where again the independent constitutional officer will be appointed through the proper consultation between the ruling party and the opposition party. And
So I'm hearing you saying, sure, go ahead, yeah.
And that has actually, that entire movement was led by the civil society, basically forcing government to have that office in place also. So I think it is the responsibility of everyone. Last point is, while you can create the institution, but we have to also ensure that how the institution coordinate with each other, because otherwise each institution also will take a different position and lead to the problem also.
Thank you so much. So, I mean, that's remarkable. What you're saying is that India managed somehow to build high-functioning institutions that were somehow protected from political interference or control and empower civil society at the same time. That's not the general picture we have of India, but clearly in the economic sphere at least, you're saying this worked significantly. Shehan, I know that the IMF governance diagnostic was published with the blessings of the government, which means the government accepted it. There must be some moves to implement some of those things. Maybe there are a few examples you can give us on how governance is being taken seriously by the government. And after that, I will come to Anil to talk about other things he wanted to say about the program and maybe what you think needs to happen in terms of governance, your top 3 priorities. And Harsha, maybe I will skip you in this session just so that we get to the next parts, okay? So Shehan, first to you, yeah.
Oh, yeah, Nishan, I think transparency is the key in our reform agenda. So that is well understood by the government. And the roadmap also is designed to ensure transparency in all activities what we take forward. And when it comes to governance matters, the governance diagnostic report, as you rightly said, was published with the blessing of the government. I think we are committed to adhere to the points which are being noted down. And to ensure transparency and good governance, we have in this short period have taken major steps. One was what Harsha was referring to on the Parliamentary Budget Office. Of course, he will have to take the responsibility in taking it forward, and it's good to hear that the officers will be recruited. And then the anti-corruption law, which was introduced recently and implemented, and today the Speaker announced in Parliament, answering one of the questions that within 2 weeks' time the commissioners will be finalized. So that's also a healthy sign. And going forward, fiscal discipline is very much important to Sri Lanka. This is where we have to put thought into. One, on evaluation, we have launched our policy from the Ministry of Finance. And then the new laws which will be brought, I think by within the first quarter of 2024, the new Fiscal Management Act will be introduced in Parliament. And I think that will have a better binding legally and otherwise on fiscal discipline. So these first few, which of course, even in this, during the budget debates also, Harsha has brought in certain points which we are considering, and will ensure that, all these, I won't call it wrongdoings, but may not be the good practices or the best practices in the world. We will ensure that good practices, good governance, best practices will be adopted. So the government is determined to do this. We do understand, and we don't want to return back to a crisis. So it is not only fiscal consolidation as I started. So it's going to be a complete revamp of the economy and the governance of the country. So we are not touching bits and pieces, but it will be a concrete solution what we are trying to bring in.
I'm going to challenge you a little bit by going back to Nadishani and Vishwas. and because Nadishani said, look, you can do all these things, but they can get reversed massively. So that she was referring to the court judgment. And Vishwa said, we built institutions that were high functioning and insulated. So, maybe I'm hearing you wrong, but one way of hearing you might be to say, we, the political leadership, have the commitment to do the right thing now. But supposing tomorrow somebody takes over and they don't have the commitment, can it get reversed? Are you building the kind of structures that actually protect these institutions from political influence? Is that part of the thinking? Or is it the good intentions of the political leadership that we depend on to solve the problem today? Is the challenge I hear coming from them, right?
I think that's a good point. If you look at what has happened in the past, it's a very reasonable question to ask also. With this reform process, I think this is one area where we need strong consensus of everybody. It is not only the parliament, it is not only the private sector, it is not only the government sector, we need the consensus of the general masses also. So this is something the government is giving a thought in, and we also will lock in these reforms by introducing certain legislations to parliament. So the first quarter of 2024 will further strengthen governance in Sri Lanka to ensure transparency. So this is one of the key areas, I think, as politicians, as the general masses, we have to agree upon. Anybody who would try to derail this reform agenda will be held responsible in the future for going back to a 2022 what we experience. So we all have to understand. If we try to look at it from a political angle, yes, certain reforms may not suit your political party or your political thought, but still, for the good of the country and the people, we'll have to make sure that those reforms are being carried forward. Finally, I just want to answer one question you brought in. I'm talking from the finance sector. I'm not talking about the law and order. But constructive criticism on any of the reforms, what we are taking forward, we encourage constructive criticism. Anybody can criticize and let us know what the changes that would be proposed. But of course, the solution has to be a very acceptable solution. It has to be acceptable. Yeah. So this is what we want to say. But of course, maintaining law and order in the country, of course, I'm not the minister or the ministry in charge of it. But for the financial sector, we will certainly encourage constructive criticism. And anything good, better than what we are following now, we are happy to follow. But unfortunately, we have asked many proposals. We haven't got any credible solution or a proposal other than what we are taking forward. But any moment and every moment, we are ready to change.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Anil, I'm going to bring you in as the first person in the next session. I can see the clock. And keep my promise to Nadishani, while not quite keeping my promise to you, to close this session by responding, I think, to what has been said here. One is that governance reforms are a priority, that they will be put in place, that constructive criticism that is acceptable will be accepted. How do you want to close this discussion on governance, Nadishani? Do you feel more confident now? Or what would you add to this thought process? Maybe not about your confidence, but what would you add to this thought process? What else do you want to see happen?
So, while it is good to hear, we would, these things about the government's commitment to transparency and openness to constructive criticism, like I said before, for example, if the Anti-Terrorism Act or the Online Safety Act, these things come upon, if you have read it, Minister, you would say our normal, critiquing, it's not possible. It's horribly drafted legislation. So it's like you're saying things here, but in action we see the opposite thing. right? And in terms of all these proposals for reform and that you all are open and that you didn't get many things, when was this announcement made asking people to give proposals, and can we be a little more public about it? I mean, you have state-owned media channels that has such wide coverage, use them, and to get citizens involved. So the problem here is there's a massive breakdown of the trust that people have on this government. I mean, at the end of the day, this is the same people who are still there, right? Who were responsible for the crisis. So and nothing has really been done to win them back. Now, yes, the Anti-Corruption Act, we've been as an organization advocating for a better law for many, many years, and we are happy that the law is finally here, but consistently our position has been that Sri Lanka never lacked legislation to combat corruption. But we were pathetic in enforcement, like implementation. Absolutely terrible. So the same thing can happen to this new law, right? And you tick the box and say we have a new law, campaign finance, we have a new law. I understand you're trying to bring a law because that's IMF requirement on proceeds of crime, but we're very good at having laws and not implementing. Or implementing it in a preferential way, implementing against that small person, takes 5,000 over the counter, severely implemented, but white-collar criminals, collusive grand scams, they can continue. I mean, everyone knows this. And impunity is a huge issue. And so people don't trust, in tax and all these things. What people know is that, yes, we are asked to pay this tax, but we know that the cronies of the governments do not necessarily pay. They get tax exemptions, tax holidays. Nobody knows why and how. Certain people never pay tax. They evade. How come we are the ones? So people don't feel that they are being treated in an equal way, in an equitable way. So you need to do something to gain that trust.
So Nadishani, I hear you say three things: that people must feel there is justice, that government must walk the talk, and that you will believe it when you see it. Okay, so thank you very much for that. I want to ask the organizers to put the QR code back up so that, because I'm not getting very many questions from you, and I'm not going to ask questions that I'm not getting. So please feel free to ask questions, and I'm going to take us, we are going to combine discussing the private sector and consensus together and kind of make this our last 25 minutes because I think we may have started late and I don't see as much time on the clock as I expected. And Anil, I want to start with you on this section, okay? So I think we skipped over the opportunity we had for you. One, to talk about what you disagreed with, to pick governance reforms that you would like to see prioritized. We thought, what are the governance reforms that you would like to see done? And what are your concerns on corruption? Before we get to national consensus, we need to hear, the alternative views that maybe the JVP brings to the table. And we would like to give you the floor to really present some, alternative views and ideas for everyone to think about and discuss. Yes.
Thank you very much. I'll take 1 minute just to link back to the IMA program as well. Yeah. In very short, we think that we need a fresh mandate from the general public to renegotiate this deal, mainly on the aspect of reducing this particular burden, the austerity measures. The other area is the investigation on the debt, because there are lots of, because information is there, odious debt is also there. The other area is to come out with a vibrant economic development plan where private sector should be promoted to bring their savings into investment. If you just take the recent statistics, the private sector savings as a percentage of GDP is more than 30, but the investment is 23 something. There is a gap of 8%. So that is mainly due to the lack of maybe the problems of conducive environment for the private sector to bring their investment to create value. So that is that. So commenting, like I'll connect this governance and the corruption measures because they go together in hand in hand. Actually, talking about the elements of the best governance, we need to understand the basis. So the premise of the governance, why do you have to talk about governance? Actually, it stems from the very basic concept of the agency. So agency is dealing with the conflict of interest. So this conflict of interest is everywhere, no matter whether it is a public sector, private sector, as long as you hold an agency, it looks like there is a tendency that conflict of interest can happen. So how best we can look at this governance, how best we enhance the governance? There are two options. One is to just keeping these self-serving structures as they are without making any structural changes. So when you engage in economic activities, so you try your level best to maximize your personal interest through your mechanism, that is the markets, the profit or rent seeking, whatever. Then you talk about governance mechanism. So how hard you try to enhance your governance mechanism while keeping these inherent problem, because it leads to unstable situation. We'll never ever solve the governance problem. So if you really want to solve this governance problem, you need to take the public interest above all other interest. So where the government can think of, then I prioritize the main key areas, so where even the corruption can also be reduced. Number one is the information asymmetry. We need to have a culture, environment where information is shared fairly for everyone to engage in economic activity. Because nowadays, you know that how information is really used to amass wealth into the hands of the very few. So need not to go into details, the information about the interest rates, foreign exchange rates, or government decision and all those things. Information asymmetry society, it doesn't help for governance. So that is number one. That could be resolved through transparency and technology, if you are really genuine enough to establish the governance issues. Number two, you need to hold all the responsible people accountable. Accountability is a must. That could be energized and empowered, enforced through legal the frameworks and legal enforcement. So mere having legal frameworks or legislation, new acts will not help. It has to be in practice. Again, you need to have ethical conduct as well. And the other one, there are many, but I limit it. The public financial management is also a key, the discipline, because either we like it or not, when we talk about a society, vibrant society, good society, in which we can live in harmony, there is a bigger role for the public finance management to do, because public procurement is increasing. So this is how the common prosperity can be achieved. So rules and regulation, good mechanisms. So mechanism may vary from place to place, depending on the situation. So those are the key areas. So arresting the corruption, it operates as it's a mere belief, it's a fact. It operates as a network. There are so many actors in this particular network. Some actors are found and visible. Some actors are really latent and not seen. So since it is connected to the agency and conflict of interest, the bigger role should be and can be done by the government agencies. That is why government has to come out with the proper governance mechanism. Then only other mechanism can be easily established.
Thank you so much, Anil. And I'm now blending this, going from governance, corruption into private sector focus and consensus afterwards. Harsha, I want to bring you in. You know, I remember one of these economic summits where Harsha at this very panel famously got up and challenged the private sector and said, stand up if there's any one of you who hasn't paid a bribe, or put your hand up, and I don't know how many put their hands up, I wasn't there. Harsha, what have you got to say to the private sector about how they can help this process? So we know the IMF, as Anil pointed out and Nadishani pointed out, may be working a lot with what government can do, but surely there is something the private sector can do. And you have been very much an interlocutor with the private sector. And we would want to hear from you as a chamber event, really your call to the private sector. What is your concern? What is your call in how the private sector must come, not simply agreeing with government, but what can they do now in solving not just economic, but also the governance problems in the country?
Nishan, if you don't mind, I would like to reply.
Please, no problem. Go ahead.
Yeah. First of all, let us agree that once the debt restructuring plan is done, it's done. Okay? So there are multiple players. We deal with multiple governments on the bilateral loans and multiple players on the multinational loans and many more on the ISBs. And everything is linked together. So if you are going to say, look, we are going to radically change the IMF program because the JVP voted against the IMF program, then we are looking at a very uncertain situation, right? Now, we have said we will renegotiate certain things in the IMF program.
Example?
And, for example, the three things. One is the focus on revenue. The second is the debt burden that we will be carrying 95% to GDP, and by 2027, 100% to GDP, which we think is actually too high. And the third point is that, you know, we are planning to go to the international markets in 2026 or 2027, which means not only we will have to have rupees in the treasury, but also reserves in the central bank so that we can buy those currency, which means we have to have a focus on tradable growth. So those are the three things that we need to improve on in the agreement. But if you are saying we are going to radically change the agreement, we have a problem.
Anil, is that a fair depiction of the JVP, that you're going to radically change?
No, that is what, like, I need to correct it, what we just voted, and we said that the content of this particular program, it is dangerous because I highlighted the areas, so that is what we voted again. It doesn't mean that we are reluctant to negotiate or deal with IMF, because at this particular juncture, we need to go ahead with IMF, but what I said that we need a fresh mandate from the general public to renegotiate, because this is not new, because this has happened all over the world. So take the example of Greece. That is how they tried 3 times to renegotiate, because when you engage in the negotiation, it is not that easy. But we have to take the side of the public interest and not the side of individual creditors or self-serving actors in this game. That is what we highlighted.
No, I mean, if you say self-serving actors, I don't know who you refer to, but we are on the side of the public. Now, we saw what India did, because we heard Mr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia yesterday, and today you said even a communist party went through the reform. India never went back. They started on a journey, and that journey continued through Congress, BJP, NDA, what's the other one? All of those, right? So what I'm saying is...
I don't see Anil disagreeing with you.
No. What I'm saying is, once then we have to spell out. You need to spell out what exactly are the changes you want to do. Because what I heard from you is, what I noted down, is that the IMF had no idea of a development plan, right? They didn't have any idea of what the production plan was, on how to go with the production plan, and therefore they went with a revenue.
I think that is misunderstanding. What I just mentioned, that IMF, of course, doesn't have a plan for us, because IMF comes along with how best it could be stabilized. I said the government doesn't have it. That is one area. But mainly the renegotiation, what I highlighted, only 3 areas. One is just to reduce the burden of the austerity measures. If you can broaden the tax base. Actually, tax base is a critical issue. And all these measures recommended keeping this economy as it is, increase in taxes and charging many things on the poor, it's a bad thing. The other area, just to, if you want to comment on, the debt restructuring process, because debt restructuring, there is a responsibility from the creditor side as well. And now creditors just ask the equitable treatment. So even IMF and other parties, they take the difference between external creditors and local. When it comes, as long as you share, the bearer share from the locally, they do not worry from who it is taken. That is the reason why government may have gone to the EPF rather than taking the money from others. The other area why I just highlighted in the renegotiation plan, of course, when we have very good evidence that with a vibrant economic plan, how best we grow our economy, how best we improve our external resources, then of course IMF will have to listen to us. But if they do not, they have to come out with some evidence, fact. This is what I said. They are the key robust elements I highlighted, Harsha.
Harsha, I think I want you to now move to the private sector. I don't see a lot of disagreement with Anil saying and what you yourself have said publicly. You said, 70% inflation, domestic market took a hit, creditors must have a share. I think maybe you all are saying since you're trying to forge consensus.
No, we're not. We're not saying the same thing. Please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying the same thing. I am saying that there has to be consensus on the reform. Right? Austerity, unfortunately, has to happen because of what the situation that we were in. Right? Stabilization needed to be done. It is upon stabilization that we can grow. Right? So there is obviously, I don't necessarily agree with the government's plan on structural change and growth, but obviously they have some sort of plan. If not, the IMF will not agree on the long-term timelines going to 2038, right? So therefore, to say, look, the government didn't have a plan, I don't think that is fair to say. Obviously, their plan is not exactly your plan, and your plan is not exactly our plan.
I think the reference was to a growth-oriented plan.
So this is my point, that I said three things. I was very specific. Right, on the tradable bias. We need a tradable bias, and that we will, and we have already told the IMF that those are things that, it's not a radical
Harsha,
change.
let's end with your three things.
Right. No.
Repeat them for us, the three things.
The three
Revenue,
No, I'm not going to end with that.
I do want to move to the consensus part.
Sure. So the three things is, I said, one, the burden on the people on the revenue, right? Okay. That is something that can be tweaked. Right? Okay. And the second one was the burden, the debt burden. The GDP to debt to GDP is too high. And the third one is that on the
it's
foreign
not ambitious
debt
enough in reducing debt to GDP.
Correct. And the foreign debt, we have to look at the balance of payments, and therefore there has to be a export orientation. That tradable bias is absent in this. So these are tweaking of the agreement as opposed to a radical reform. But
Harsha, can we come back to your other points, or if you just tell me what the points are about, I'll fit it in with other questions.
Right. On the matter of ODS debt, this is a serious matter. If we think we as a country can go and say, look, this is ODS debt, therefore we are not going to pay. Yes, in this last 2 centuries, perhaps a few times ODS debt cases have been won. I think after revolutions they have happened, Anil, you know that, right? But not in context where, like the Supreme Court case very clearly said, a man-made disaster. It is not ODS debt. It is just the bad management of the government of the day that squandered the money. So you can't tell the creditor, look, we are not going to pay it because it's odious. So therefore, I have a strong sort of objection to say that if we can say this is odious, so therefore we are unable to pay. And the whole, where I do agree with him, however,
I want to hear, Harsha, where you agree.
Yeah, I agree on the need for better transparency. I agree on the need for the information asymmetry to be reduced or removed completely, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean, like you said, interest rates being known by other people. But actually it goes down to the point of the farmer making a decision on what to grow and how much to grow. The information markets for agriculture is not working. So the information asymmetry issue goes across the board.
And I want this panel then to agree on one thing, and I'm sorry that it's going to put Shehan a little bit on the spot, but you're allowed to say, look, I won't comment. Nadishani mentioned that on the 30th of March, we were supposed to publish what's called a transparency platform that showed procurement, that showed tax breaks. and it's still not done. And it's in the governance diagnostic also. So maybe Shehan, does everybody agree that that should be published as soon as possible? Or is there a disagreement on that? Why, is there a reason not to publish it? I think we should come to Shehan last on that, but maybe everybody else, Vishwas, of course, is not in the mix. So, so Harsha, are you in agreement that it should be published?
Of course, I mean.
Of course. So Shehan, maybe you should just say what is your position, even if you can't, make sure it happens.
Sure, actually, there is no disagreement to it. But you have to understand that this entire the state of the economy was very complex. So most of the comments what I hear, if I have rightly understood, is that even though there are slight deviations, the path of the government is right. Of course, the approaches could differ, but this is the right path to go. So I think on the reform agenda, we will bring in more points for transparency as well as accountability. So these are 2 points which we all agree. I mean, we have to, most of the times we talk about the past, what has gone wrong, how it has gone wrong, and who has been responsible. But I think we'll have to stop it at one stage and ensure that all these mistakes which has happened does not
bring it in 5 minutes.
Does not repeat back. So our
Shan,
point is,
give
me a second, Nishan.
Yeah.
So my point is, what has happened in the past should not repeat back, but who is accountable? That is a process that the legal system will have to take forward, and as the government, we will certainly encourage, we will not disturb any of the processes which are being taken forward. So the reforms, I think from our side, we have been very candid on what we are taking forward. And we have offered, if there are any more, maybe stronger positions that anybody could hold and which is accepted, we are willing to accept it. I think that is a consensus that we all will have to have, because if you look at politically on this entire process, finally the country will have to suffer again. So we'll have to go forward, we'll have to strengthen the path and ensure that we come out of bankruptcy first. Because we were talking about the private sector also. So we have to come out of bankruptcy. The President has clearly said that within this year, we will come out of bankruptcy. So we are in the path of meeting the timelines. We are very confident on that. And we will have the IMF second tranche unlocked. We will have the World Bank, the ADB, other institutions supporting us, the financing support unlocked. We'll have the projects which were halted for almost 15 or 18 months. Will recommence back in January. So the economy will have a boom. But to reach that point, we have to ensure we take the right paths. Most of the decisions which we took in the recent past, the President or the government was never made popular. Those were, I think most of it were unpopular decisions. But somebody had to take that hit. So it was the President who decided to take the hit. He took that challenge. The government took the challenge. I think we have had a reasonable and a somewhat remarkable stabilization of the economy.
Thank
so
you,
this
Shehan.
should be continued.
Yeah, so I think, Shehan is effectively saying that people don't know what's good for them, so when you do it, you become unpopular. But the government has, in the better interests of the people, carried on with those policies. But there is an audience question, Anil, to you, because you talked about getting people's consensus, and Shehan saying, look, people's consensus doesn't work, they don't know what's good for them, it's not popular, but the audience is asking you, how do you want people's consensus? Do you want a referendum? Do you want an election? So before my iPad went to charge, that was the question that came in. How do you plan to go about getting consensus if you had a say-so on how that could be done, is effectively the question.
Actually, to agree on, like to have a kind of consensus, we need to have such an environment. So as of now, it is a fact that so country is in a political crisis. We may agree or disagree. So therefore, general public is not in the weave. Like sometimes even the government might take some decision genuinely, but the people is not in a weave or a position to accept or believe in what the government is going to do. So therefore, fresh mandate is needed, no matter who is going to rule the country. So before reaching the consensus to have long-term the plan, economic development plan or a stabilization plan, of course, we need an election. So do not know. That is one of the democratic rights, maybe general election, the presidential. So then only that we can use that mandate, I just told you, by the government who would be elected to put the things into the program and activate it, execute it, and achieve these goals. This is how the consensus should be achieved. And again, so consensus for what? So, if we agree on certain things, because when we take the different stratas of the stakeholders, the majority of the general public does not have any avenues or institutions to take part in this consensus process or stakeholder engagement process. So where we need, of course, Sri Lanka is lacking in this case, civil society organizations. So very weak situation is also there. We need to have a kind of platform on which such discourses to promote the public interest. So that is the key point. At the end of the day, if I just summarize this into one equation, it is nothing but and how best we leverage between private interest and public interest. Whenever you hold the power, so there is a tendency that you take actions to serve private interest. That is why we have to talk about governance, ethical conduct, and all sort of things. So then the consensus should be reached based on these common objectives. Otherwise, the consensus would be somewhere in between where the handful of people might agree on certain things. Then you have your share of your interest, simply ignoring the general public. That may be really dangerous for the general public and the humanity.
Okay, I have to end our panel, and so I'm going to just throw up one question that each one can answer and start with Shehan and come through, and I'll invite all of you. So in the interest of, and now we talked about the process of building consensus, and Harsha, of course, came up with 3 things he thought were very critical. I had given you all this question. Can you, in the private sector, we talk about minimum viable product, MVPs. Let's talk about a MVC, a minimum viable consensus. We can't all agree on everything, but is there at the heart of it some minimum set of things that we must agree on to keep the country on track? So, Shehan, I'm going to start with you. What is that minimum viable consensus that you can suggest to us today? 2 or 3 things that you can put into that bowl.
Nishan, first of all, the IMF program is very important. We can't deviate from the program. I mean, some will have different opinions, but there is no other way forward without the IMF program. So we have to have consensus on that. And the reform agenda, what we are following.
That's 1.
Well, yeah. 1, maybe 1.5.
Okay.
And then the contribution of the private sector. Because the intention of the government or the policy of the government would be that we as a government would be a regulator only. So we want more contribution from the private sector
Contribution in terms of?
in terms of taking forward the economy, and we will ensure that we will build up a conducive environment for the private sector to operate, and we will move away from business ventures and allow the private sector to take it forward, but we will remain as a regulator. So these are a few things that the government has planned, and in my opinion, we should not derail the existing program what we are taking forward. So this is very important because there is political stability, and we want a stable economy, and to ensure as we plan to grow in 2024. So this, if you try to derail this, look at minor points, look at politically how it is going to affect you, I think that will be a big disaster on the economy and the country as a whole.
Thank you, Shehan. Harsha, your minimum MVC, minimum viable consensus.
Yeah, I'll add to what Shehan said, right? I mean, we've been having this discussion, Nishan, for over a decade. You know, what is a social market economy? You know, sort of a synthesis of economic freedom, economic liberalism, and political liberalism. So in that context, we believe in markets, right? So markets work. Private sector uses the market. Price signal is what drives investment and decisions. So that we must respect. That's what we work on. But the political liberalism is justice and equity, right? So there are two sides to the equation. So in that context, I'm sure we can forge consensus with what Shehan said in, you know, providing a platform for the private sector to do its part and for the government to ensure that the right conducive policy environment exists, not just, you know, the governance. Governance is absolutely important, right? I'm assuming that everybody agrees on that, but on a regulatory and legal framework and so on. So to build confidence in Sri Lanka is what all political parties must strive to do. Confidence. Without confidence, I think we will be stuck in this hole for a long time to come.
Thank you, Harsha. I'm going to go in order and ask Nadishani for her minimum, her suggestions. And you don't have to have... Yeah. Yes, keep it brief is the concern. They want to...
Okay. I think transparency, accountability, and zero tolerance for corruption should be something we can agree on. Let's just stop tolerating corruption. We can see where it got us. And I just have, and just to add this message for the chambers, for professional bodies, I'm sure there are chartered accountants, many other professional bodies here. You know, there cannot be any kind of grand corruption, what we call collusive corruption, without the support of businesses and professionals. We call them the enablers of corruption. None of these grand scams could have happened without lawyers, accountants, auditors, real estate agents, you know, financial institutions enabling the siphoning away of public funds, the money laundering, you know, and all the rent seeking, you know. So, therefore, please while you demand the politicians and the public officials and the citizens to change course, what about the role of businesses and professionals? Right? If
Shani,
you can
thank you. I have some accountability problems as well from
Okay.
the MC. So I think that point is well made, and I'm going to just move on to Anil to give his
actually, yes.
as well. Yeah.
Minimum consensus. So let me decide what markets can do and what markets cannot do. So we believe and agree, we promote that private sector can play a vibrant role in the markets. So within a conducive environment, even tax system and all those things, we can agree on these things, only for commodities. So where the like a healthy competition would bring about innovation, value creation, and that is good for the mankind. So the items, so the rights and services are not commodities. Then we should not commodify them. So the role of dealing with these items, rights and services, should be done with the public sector, the government. It doesn't mean that the private sector does not have a role. Private sector has a role, but not through the competition, but maybe at the collisions and other things. Otherwise, what would happen? Unless we reach this minimum consensus between the commodification and non-commodification, and we would even knowingly or unknowingly slip through to a market society. Now we need to have a market economy and not a market society. The market society is a place where everything is up for sale. So love, affection, civic rights, all those things. So it's really dangerous. Now we are facing this danger. So minimum consensus, if we can do that, I think we can have a better society in the future.
Thank you. Vishwas, I'm just going to tell you to maybe pick up one or two things people said that resonated with how it worked in India and do it briefly for us before we end.
Yeah, and I think, let me pick up one or two. It's important actually, as you said, probably Harsha, about the building the confidence and pride, actually, that's important. You said we cannot, there is no way to go back, and then that leads to the everyone act on that. Transparency, the role being played by all the professional bodies, I think it's very, very important. And we need to encourage that. I'll just add one more thing. When we talk about building the consensus, we talk about private sector, the chambers, government, politician, bureaucrat. I think the government should also try to use the digital platform to reach out to citizens, kind of a public consultation, take them on the board and confidence. I think that will go a long way, because ultimately they are the beneficiary, and with all those things, I think you need to do two things: improve the ease of doing business and same time reduce the cost of doing the business. Someone said it's one over the other, but I think they go hands in hand. I think things will definitely see the better.
So let me summarize, and thank you all for being here. You know, there's not too many and very interesting set of things thrown into the minimal viable consensus. I think for the private sector, we heard, both Shehan and Harsha say, look, you need to support the initiatives and path of the government and do whatever you can to help things go forward, not backwards. I think there was also the call to really fight grand corruption, that it takes two hands to clap, and that if private sector wants a government without corruption, they must do their own part in making sure that private sector is not enabling corruption. That's what Nadishani said. And then that transparency and accountability is something that we can all champion, both private sector and government, and that can become a curative force in this governance problem that was there. And, I thought there was wide agreement around that. Then there were some things about the nature of government. I think Shehan said, look, we are on a path, don't derail it. Keep it going, don't try to destabilize it. Harsha said, well, yes, but, let's get justice and equity at the center of this thing. And also, Vishwas pointed out, that means consultation, public engagement, public understanding. You don't get justice and equity from the sky, you get it by people listening, understanding and accepting what you do. And then Anil pointed out, don't depend on the markets to solve all your problems. That there are things that our markets are good at, but being human is more than the market. It's culture, it's values, it's also solving public problems that markets can't solve. And so let's make that distinction and be intentional about creating a more flourishing society. I think these are a very rich set of ideas for a minimum viable consensus, and perhaps more discussions can be had like this in Parliament and in decision making as well, to help bring the country towards a more stable and better path of economic recovery. We thank the panelists and thank you all for being here.